In Fair Hollow, Arkansas, a desperate widow was about to bid her last 15 cents on worthless land. What started as a humiliating auction in the dusty town square took a shocking turn when she unfolded the deed and discovered 3 words that would change everything. Subterranean vault. Section 11. Nora Wren wasn't your typical small-town widow quietly accepting her fate. For 3 years since her husband's accidental death in a mine collapse, she had scraped by on nothing, watching her daughter grow thin while the church grew fat. Known for her quiet resilience and the kind of desperate courage that comes from having nothing left to lose. When she purchased that forgotten church plot on Mercy Hill for the price of a loaf of bread, she had no idea she was buying her way into a century-old conspiracy. Nora discovered a rusted key tied to the deed with red ribbon, a key that would unlock not just a sealed trapdoor, but decades of theft, murder and corruption sanctified by men of God. What she found beneath that burned chapel would force her to choose between her daughter's safety and exposing a truth that Fair Hollow's most powerful families had killed to keep buried. What began as a widow's foolish gamble on abandoned ground would become a battle against priests, politicians, and a $6 million gold smuggling operation hidden beneath consecrated soil. The town of Fair Hollow would never be the same after Nora Wren decided that some secrets are too deadly to stay buried and some prices are too high to pay, even for survival. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm an old woman now, my hands too gnarled to hold a pen steady for long, but I need to write this down before memory fails me entirely or God calls me home, whichever comes first. Some sins don't wash away with confession. Some truths don't soften with time. What I'm about to tell you happened in Fair Hollow, Arkansas in 1934, when the world was dust and desperation, and I was fool enough to believe 15 cents could buy salvation. The auction took place on a Tuesday, which should have been my first warning. Nothing good ever happened on a Tuesday in Fair Hollow. The town square was packed despite the heat, despite the drought that had turned the Arkansas soil to powder, despite the fact that most folks there didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Desperation draws a crowd better than any carnival. My daughter June stood beside me, her thin dress already dark with sweat, though it wasn't yet noon. She was 14 then, all sharp elbows and sharper eyes, watching the auctioneer with the kind of intensity that made me nervous. June had always seen too much, understood too early. Loss does that to a child. Her father had been dead 3 years by then, buried in a mine collapse that the company called an act of God, to avoid paying widows what they were owed. "Mama," June whispered, tugging at my sleeve. "What are we bidding on?" "Food land," I told her, though the lie tasted bitter. "A small plot, something we can work." The truth was, I had 37 cents in my pocket, everything we had left after the landlord took his share of nothing. I'd come to the auction with the kind of hope that only the desperate carry. The kind that turns to ash the moment you examine it too closely. The auctioneer was a fat man named Dobbins, red-faced and jovial in the way that cruel men often are. He stood on a makeshift platform of crates, sweat rolling down his neck as he sold off the remnants of failed dreams. A plow with a broken blade went for $2. A wagon with 3 good wheels went for $5. Each sale punctuated by Dobbins's gavel, coming down like a judge's sentence. "Next up," Dobbins announced, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd, "we have the old Guthrie property. 2 acres, good soil, creek access. Starting bid $15. My chest tightened. $15 might as well have been 15,000. The property went quick, snapped up by a rancher from 2 counties over. Then came the livestock, what little there was. A mule too old for heavy work, chickens that had stopped laying, a milk cow gone dry. The crowd thinned after each sale, folks drifting away with their purchases or their disappointments. June squeezed my hand. "Mama, maybe we should go." "Not yet," I said, though I didn't know what I was waiting for. That's when Dobbins held up a piece of paper, yellowed and curled at the edges. His grin widened into something mean. "Now here's something special, folks," he drawled, his voice dripping with mock reverence. "Prime real estate for anyone looking to get close to their maker a little early. The old church plot on Mercy Hill, you know the one. That abandoned eyesore nobody's visited since before the war. Starting bid $1. Silence fell over the remaining crowd. The old church plot. Everyone knew it. A forgotten rectangle of cracked headstones and wild grass at the edge of town, where the ground was too poor for farming and the memories too dark for dwelling on. St. Brigid's Chapel had stood there once. Before it burned in 1911, the new church had been built in town proper, and the old grounds left to rot. "Come on now," Dobbins cajoled. "Surely someone wants a piece of hallowed ground." "No, how about 50 cents? A few people chuckled nervously. Nobody raised their hand. 25 cents? Good Lord, folks, you can't even buy a decent meal for 25 cents these days. More laughter, uncomfortable now. I felt something stir in my chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to its bitter cousin. Defiance, maybe. Or just the kind of desperation that makes fools of us all. 15 cents, Dobbins said, shaking his head. 15 cents for the whole damn plot, pardon my French. Do I hear 15 cents? My hand went up before my brain could stop it. The laughter died. Every head turned toward me. Dobbins blinked, as if seeing me for the first time. Well, well, he said slowly. Nora Wren should have known. You got 15 cents, Nora? I do. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Then I suppose it's yours. He banged his gavel, the sound like a door slamming shut. Sold to the widow Wren. God help you. More laughter then, but different. Pitying, mocking, the kind that follows you home and seeps into your dreams. June's hand tightened in mine, her face burning with shared humiliation. But I held my head up as I walked to Dobbins' table and counted out 15 of my 37 cents. He handed me the deed with a flourish that felt like an insult. Pleasure doing business. We walked away quickly, June's eyes fixed on the ground. I didn't look at the deed until we were 3 blocks from the square, standing in the shade of the old post office. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the yellowed paper. At the top, in faded but official-looking script, Deed of Sale, Parcel 47, Mercy Hill Cemetery Grounds. Then the property boundaries, the date of original claim, 1867, and a list of previous owners. Each name crossed out, but 3 lines down from the lot number, barely visible in ink that had faded to the color of rust, were words that made my breath catch. Annexed holdings, Subterranean Vault, Section 11. Mama? June leaned closer. What does that mean? I traced the words with my finger, as if touching them might make them less strange. I don't know, but even as I said it, I felt the weight of those words settling over me like snow. Subterranean Vault, underground, beneath the church grounds I'd just bought for less than the cost of a loaf of bread. Look. June pointed to the bottom of the deed, where a small iron key had been tied to the document with a fraying red ribbon. The key was old, covered in rust, its teeth worn smooth. What's it for? I don't know, I said again, but this time the words felt like a lie. Across the street, standing in the shadow of the general store, I noticed a man watching us. He was tall and hard-looking, with the kind of face that seemed carved from the same stone as the town itself. When our eyes met, he didn't look away, just stood there perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the deed in my hands. Mama, June whispered. That man's staring. Don't look at him. I folded the deed quickly and tucked it into my pocket, the key pressing cold against my hip. Let's go home. But as we walked away, I felt the weight of that stare following us like a shadow. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that I'd just bought more than a plot of forgotten graves. I'd bought a secret. And in Fair Hollow, secrets had teeth. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the narrow bed I shared with June, listening to her breathe in the darkness, and thought about that deed. About the words that shouldn't have been there. About the way that man had stared. Father Lucien Bellamy had been at the auction. I remembered seeing him now, standing near the back of the crowd, in his black coat despite the heat, his handsome face carefully neutral. He'd been watching when I raised my hand, watching when Dobbins handed me the deed. And when I looked for him afterward, he was gone. Father Bellamy had been the priest at St. Bridget's for as long as I could remember. He'd buried my husband, baptized my daughter, and spoken so beautifully about grace and suffering that even the hardest men in town wept during his sermons. Everyone loved Father Bellamy, but I remembered something else too. How quickly the church had been built after the old one burned. How well the priest lived while the town starved. How certain questions about the fire, about the old cemetery, about why no one was allowed on Mercy Hill, were met with gentle redirection and talk of respecting the dead. I thought about those things until dawn crept through our single window. And by then, I'd made a decision. Tomorrow, I'd go see what I'd actually bought. The walk to Mercy Hill took an hour in the morning heat. June trailing behind me with the kind of resigned silence that meant she thought I was making a mistake, but loved me too much to say so. The road turned from packed dirt to loose gravel to no road at all. Just a path worn by feet that hadn't walked it in years. The old church grounds sat on a rise overlooking the valley, surrounded by a rusted iron fence that had collapsed in places. The gate hung crooked on one hinge, squealing when I pushed it open. Wild grass had claimed most of the plot, growing knee-high between headstones that leaned at drunken angles. Some markers had been worn smooth by time and weather, their inscriptions lost to the years. Others were cracked or fallen, revealing the dark earth beneath. At the far end stood the ruins of St. Bridget's Chapel, or what was left of it. Stone walls blackened by fire rose like broken teeth against the sky, empty windows staring blindly at nothing. The roof was long gone, collapsed inward. Vines had claimed the entrance, creating a curtain of green over charred wood. "It's not much," June said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It's not." But there was something about the place that made my skin prickle. Not quite fear, but something close. The same feeling you get standing at the edge of deep water, knowing you can't see the bottom. We walked among the graves, June reading what names she could while I studied the layout of the property. Most of the headstones dated from the 1860s and 70s, miners mostly, judging by the inscriptions. Men who'd come to Arkansas chasing silver and found only early graves. A few belonged to women and children. One entire section was marked simply unknown. A dozen identical wooden crosses now rotted to stumps. "Mama." June's voice had an edge to it. "Look at this." She was standing near the chapel ruins, pointing at the ground. I joined her and saw what had caught her attention. A section of the foundation where the stone blocks didn't quite match. They were newer, less weathered, and fitted together with deliberate care to form a rectangle about 4 feet across. A sealed entrance. Or a sealed exit. "What do you think is down there?" June whispered. Before I could answer, a voice cut through the silence like a knife. "You're trespassing!" We both jumped. A man emerged from behind the ruined chapel, tall and lean, with shoulders bent from a lifetime of hard labor. He carried a shovel, dirt caked on the blade. His face was weathered as old leather, his eyes the color of storm clouds. "This is private property," he continued, his voice rough as gravel. "It's my property," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I bought it yesterday, at auction." The man's eyes narrowed. "You're the widow, Nora Wren. This is my daughter June." He studied us for a long moment, then spat into the grass. "Eli Merrin. I'm the gravedigger. The church still pays me to maintain this place, though God knows why. Nobody's been buried here in 20 years. If nobody's been buried here, what are you digging?" His expression hardened. "Maintenance. Keeping the vines from taking over completely. Making sure nothing disturbs what ought to stay buried." There was something in the way he said that last part that made my spine straighten. "What do you mean, what ought to stay buried?" Eli Merrin leaned on his shovel, his gaze moving past us to the ruined chapel. "You seem like a decent woman, Mrs. Wren, so I'm going to give you some advice. Sell this property back to the church. Take whatever they offer and don't ask questions. I paid 15 cents for it. The church had years to buy it if they wanted it. 15 cents. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, you got robbed." "By who?" "The property was worthless." "Was it?" He shifted his weight, and I noticed how carefully he was standing, positioned between us and that sealed section of foundation. "You read that deed careful? All of it?" My hand moved instinctively to my pocket where the folded paper rested. "I read it. Then you know this land comes with more than dirt and headstones." "The vault," June said suddenly. "The deed mentioned a vault." Eli's face went very still. "You need to leave, both of you, before sundown." "Why? What happens at sundown?" "Nothing happens at sundown. But before dark, this place is just an old cemetery. After dark," he trailed off, shaking his head, "just go, and don't come back." He turned and walked away, disappearing around the far side of the ruins before I could ask anything more. His shovel remained stuck in the ground where he'd left it, like a warning marker. June moved closer to me. "Mama, what did he mean? What's wrong with this place?" I'd looked at the sealed foundation stones, at the blackened chapel walls, at the unmarked graves stretching across the hillside. The sunlight seemed thinner here, as if something about the ground itself absorbed the light. "I don't know," I said. "But I'm going to find out." We spent another hour walking the property, marking boundaries and counting headstones. 73 in total, though I suspected there were more that time had claimed completely. The sealed section by the chapel was the only obvious irregularity. But the more I studied the layout, the more questions formed. Why were so many graves unmarked? Why had the church been built here in the first place, on a hill exposed to weather, far from town? And why did a cemetery deed from 1867 mention a vault that shouldn't exist? By the time we started the walk home, the sun was already sinking toward the western hills. June walked close beside me, uncharacteristically quiet. She'd found the key in my pocket and held it now, turning it over in her hands. "Do you think it fits?" she asked finally. "Fits what?" "The trapdoor. Those stones by the chapel." I'd been thinking the same thing, but hearing her say it out loud made it real, dangerous. "I don't know, but you want to find out." I looked at my daughter, her thin frame, her dirt-smudged face, her eyes that had seen too much loss already. What kind of mother was I, dragging her into something that even the gravedigger warned against? But then I thought about the 37 cents that had become 22 cents, about the landlord who'd be coming for rent we didn't have, about a world that had already taken so much from us that I'd stopped believing in fair warnings. "Yes," I said. "I want to find out." That night, June dreamed of bells ringing underground. She woke me in the darkness, her hand clutching my arm, her voice small and frightened. "Mama, I heard them. Church bells, but wrong somehow. Like they were calling from beneath the earth." I held her until she fell back asleep, but I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking about sealed doorways and secrets that even grave diggers feared. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I'd seek answers from someone who might actually give them. I'd go see Agnes Holloway. Agnes Holloway lived in a house that looked like it was trying to sink back into the earth. The roof sagged, the walls leaned at angles that defied physics, and every window was shuttered despite the heat. The front garden was a tangle of dead roses and weeds that had gone to seed. A wooden cross hung above the door, weathered grey and tilted slightly to the left. It took me 3 rounds of knocking before the door cracked open, revealing a single pale eye in the darkness beyond. "Mrs. Holloway, my name is Nora Wren. I was hoping I could speak with you." "Don't know you." The voice was reedy, suspicious. "Don't want to, please. It's about St. Bridget's, the old church on Mercy Hill." The door opened a fraction wider. Agnes Holloway was ancient, or looked it anyway. Her face was a map of wrinkles, her hair white as bone and pinned in a severe bun. She wore black from neck to ankle despite the heat, like she was in perpetual mourning. "What about the old church?" she asked. "Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I bought the property at auction, and I found something in the deed that—" "You bought it?" Her eye widened, the pupil huge and dark. "Dear God, you actually bought it?" "Yes, ma'am. For 15 cents. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. 15 cents. They must be desperate indeed. Who? Who's desperate? Agnes Holloway stared at me for a long moment, then stepped back and opened the door fully. You'd better come in. The interior of her house was exactly what I'd feared. Dark, close, smelling of old paper and older gilt. Every surface was covered with religious artifacts, crucifixes, rosaries, icons of saints with their eyes turned toward heaven. But what caught my attention were the books. Hundreds of them, stacked on shelves and piled on tables, their spines cracked and pages yellowed. You were a nun, I said, recognizing some of the titles. Theological texts, church histories, lives of saints. Who was? Agnes settled into a chair that creaked under her slight weight. Long time ago, before I learned that holiness and horror can wear the same face. She gestured for me to sit. I perched on the edge of a chair stacked with papers, my hands clasped tight in my lap. Mrs. Holloway, the deed I received. It mentions something called a subterranean vault. Section 11. Do you know what that means? Her face went very still. Show me. I pulled the deed from my pocket and handed it over. She studied it in silence, her lips moving slightly as she read. When she looked up, her expression was ancient and afraid. You shouldn't have this, she whispered. This deed should have been lost years ago, but it wasn't, and now I own whatever it describes. I leaned forward. Mrs. Holloway, please. What's beneath that church? She was quiet for so long I thought she might refuse to answer. Then she stood, moving to a trunk in the corner. She rummaged through it with shaking hands and pulled out a roll of yellowed paper tied with string. I served as a novice at St. Bridget's, she said, untying the string. Back in 1910, when I was just 17. Father Samuel Bellamy was the priest then, current Father Bellamy's uncle. The church was beautiful, full of light and music and what I thought was grace. She unrolled the paper, revealing an architectural drawing, a blueprint of St. Bridget's chapel. But beneath the main structure, drawn in finer ink, was another level. A series of chambers and tunnels spreading out beneath the church like roots. The Vault of Atonement, Agnes said, her finger tracing the lines. That's what Father Samuel called it. He said it was built by the first priest as a place of sacred meditation. But it wasn't. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. It was never that. What was it? A hiding place. A smuggler's cache. She looked up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. In the 1860s, this territory was wild. Silver mines everywhere, attracting men from all over. Some of those men found more than silver. They found gold. Small amounts at first, then larger deposits. But this was federal territory, and any gold belonged to the government. I felt my pulse quicken. They hid it. In the church. Not just hid it. Laundered it, shipped it out in coffins, marked as holy relics being transported east. She pointed to the blueprint's lowest level. That's what the vault was for, storage, distribution, and occasionally, she swallowed hard. Occasionally, the removal of problems. What kind of problems? The kind that asked too many questions. Miners who wanted their share. Federal agents who got too close. Anyone who threatened the operation. The room felt suddenly cold despite the heat. You're saying people died down there. I'm saying people disappeared. And the church kept standing, kept its doors open, kept singing its hymns over a foundation built on theft and murder. I thought about the unmarked graves, about Eli Merrin's warning, about my husband, buried after a mine collapse that everyone called an accident. The fire, I said. In 1911, what really happened? Agnes's hands trembled as she rolled up the blueprint. I happened. I was young and stupid and believed in miracles. I found Father Samuel's ledgers, records of every shipment, every name, every sin. I confronted him, told him I'd expose everything to the bishop. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. He laughed at me, said the bishop already knew, that the whole operation had been sanctioned from the top, that God's work required earthly funds, and how else were we to build his kingdom? So you burned it down. I tried to. Thought if I destroyed the church, I'd destroy the evidence. But you can't burn stone, and you can't burn guilt. She looked at me, her face crumbling. The fire killed 3 people, altar boys who'd come early for morning mass. I murdered 3 children trying to expose murder. The weight of her confession filled the room like smoke. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know if there were words that could hold that much pain. Father Samuel died in the fire too, Agnes continued. They found him in the vault, suffocated by smoke. His nephew, Father Lucian, took over. Oversaw the building of the new church in town. Promised it would be different, holy, clean, but it isn't. No, her voice was flat. The vault still exists. The gold is still there. And the family money that funded this town's prosperity, all of it came from that hole in the ground. She handed me the blueprint. You need to leave Fair Hollow, Mrs. Wren. Tonight, take your daughter and go. I can't. I don't have anywhere to go. Then stay away from Mercy Hill. Don't go near that church. Don't let your curiosity kill you the way mine killed those boys. I took the blueprint with hands that didn't feel like mine. If I do nothing, this continues. The lies, the theft, all of it just keeps happening. Better lies than death. We both turned at the sound of footsteps on the porch, heavy, deliberate. Then a knock at the door, 3 precise raps. Agnes went white. No, she breathed. Not now. The door opened before either of us could move. Father Lucien Bellamy stepped inside, his black coat immaculate, his smile warm as summer sunshine. Agnes, he said gently. And Mrs. Wren. What a surprise to find you both here. He wasn't surprised. I could see it in his eyes, the calculation, the control. He'd known exactly where I'd go seeking answers. Father Bellamy, I managed. We were just discussing old times, I imagine. He moved deeper into the room, his presence somehow making the space smaller. Agnes has such vivid memories of the old church. Don't you, Agnes? The old woman had shrunk back in her chair, her face a mask of terror. I didn't tell her anything, no. He picked up one of the books from a nearby pile, examined its spine, set it down with deliberate care. That's wise. Some stories are best left in the past, where they belong. His gaze shifted to me, and I felt the full weight of it, not unkind, but absolute. Like being studied by something vast and patient. Mrs. Wren, I understand you've purchased the old church property. That must have been unexpected. It was all I could afford. Of course. These are difficult times. He moved closer, and I caught the scent of incense and something else, something mineral like old coins. I wanted to offer you an opportunity. The church would be willing to buy back that property. For a fair price, naturally. More than you paid. How much more? The $10, he smiled. Nearly 70 times your investment. Quite generous, don't you think? I thought about my 22 remaining cents, about the rent I couldn't pay, about June, who deserved better than a mother chasing ghosts beneath abandoned churches. Why? I asked. Why would the church pay that much for worthless land? It's not worthless to us. It's consecrated ground. We feel a responsibility to maintain it properly. His smile never wavered. And Mrs. Wren, I hope you'll forgive my directness, but you're a widow with a young daughter to care for. $10 could make a real difference in your lives. Why burden yourself with property you can't use? Everything he said made perfect sense. It was logical, kind even. But I thought about the blueprint hidden in my pocket, about the unmarked graves, about Agnes Holloway's trembling hands and the terror in her eyes. I'll need to think about it, I said. Something flickered behind Father Bellamy's smile. So brief I might have imagined it. Of course. Take all the time you need. He moved toward the door, then paused. Though I wouldn't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come often. He left as quietly as he'd arrived. Agnes and I sat in silence until the sound of his footsteps faded completely. You should have taken it, Agnes whispered. Taken the money and run. Maybe. I stood, tucking the blueprint more securely into my pocket. Or maybe it's time someone stopped running. They'll kill you. Maybe they'll try. I looked at the old woman, at the decades of guilt that had bent her spine and dimmed her eyes. But I'm tired of being afraid, Mrs. Holloway, tired of watching powerful men take everything while calling it God's will. I left her there among her relics and her ghosts, the blueprint burning like a brand against my ribs. The sun was setting as I walked home, painting the sky the color of old blood. June was waiting on the porch, her face tight with worry. Where were you? Getting answers. I pulled her close. And tomorrow night we're going to get the truth. How? I thought about sealed doorways and rusted keys, about tunnels spreading beneath a church like roots seeking rot. We're going back to Mercy Hill, I said. And we're going to see what they've been hiding. June didn't argue. She just nodded, her jaw set with determination that reminded me painfully of her father. That night, as we lay in bed, I heard her breathing shift into sleep. But I stayed awake, watching shadows move across the ceiling and thinking about Agnes Holloway's warning. Some secrets stay buried for a reason, but some secrets bury you if you let them. Tomorrow, I'd find out which kind I'd bought for 15 cents. We returned to Mercy Hill under a moonless sky, Eli Merrin walking ahead with a lantern held low. He'd been waiting at the gate when June and I arrived, as if he'd known we'd come. Your husband, he'd said without preamble. A mine collapse in 31? Yes. My father disappeared that same year. They said he went looking for work in Memphis. His jaw tightened. But my father hated cities. Now we stood before the sealed foundation stones, the key heavy in my palm. It slid into a hidden lock with a click that sounded like bones settling. The stones shifted, revealing darkness and stairs, descending into earth that smelled of rust and old fear. "Stay behind me," Eli said, descending first. The tunnel was narrow, the walls rough-hewn stone slick with moisture. Mining equipment lay scattered along the passage. Rusted picks, broken lanterns, empty crates stamped with federal seals and eagle insignias. Gold transport containers. God in heaven, Eli breathed. June's hand found mine in the darkness. We moved deeper, following the tunnel as it opened into a wider chamber. More crates here, some splintered open to reveal straw packing. And then Eli's lantern caught something that made him stop. So suddenly I nearly collided with his back, a skeletal hand emerging from collapsed earth. On one finger, a simple band of gold. Eli knelt slowly, his hand shaking as he brushed dirt away from the skull. "Pa," he whispered. "Oh God, Pa." I pulled June close, as Eli wept over bones that had been hidden for 3 years. Around us, the walls seemed to press closer, whispering secrets through cracks in the stone. That's when I saw the ledgers. Leather-bound books stacked on a makeshift desk. I opened one with trembling fingers. Page after page of names, dates, shipment records. Gold amounts, and in the margins, notations in careful script. Problem resolved. Vault sealed. Blessed cargo transferred. My husband's name appeared on the final page, dated 2 weeks before his death. Next to it, Shunwen Taidor Tuli. Too many questions. Handled above us voices. Footsteps on the chapel floor. Can't let this surface now, not with the federal audit. Then we seal it permanently. Tonight, Father Bellamy. And Mayor Pike. Eli looked at me, his grief transforming into something harder. "Go, take one of those ledgers and go. Not without you. They'll be down here in minutes. Someone needs to get that book to the marshal." He stood gripping his shovel like a weapon. "I'll buy you time." Before I could argue, he was moving back toward the stairs, toward the voices growing closer. June and I ran deeper into the tunnel, the ledger clutched against my chest, my daughter's frightened breathing loud in the dark. Behind us, I heard Eli shout. Then silence that was somehow worse. Sunday morning found me in the third pew of St. Bridget's new church, the ledger hidden beneath loose floorboards at home. June sat rigid beside me, her Sunday dress pressed but her eyes hollow from 2 nights without sleep. Father Bellamy ascended to the pulpit, his face serene as morning light. "Today's sermon concerns greed," he began, his voice carrying to every corner. "How it corrupts. How it turns children against parents, neighbors against neighbors. How it makes good people do terrible things." His eyes found mine across the congregation, held. There are those among us who would dig up the past. Who would disturb what God himself has sealed? His voice rose, passionate now. "But I tell you, some graves must remain closed. Some truths are too heavy for mortal souls to bear." Around me, heads nodded. Amens echoed. Nobody looked at me, but I felt their awareness like heat. After the service, Sheriff Roy Elkins intercepted me outside. His face was weathered leather, his badge dull in the sunlight. "Mrs. Wren, a word." June pressed closer to my side. The sheriff noticed, and something like regret crossed his features. "Ma'am, I'm going to be straight with you. There was an accident last night. Elimerin. Cave-in at the old church site." His voice dropped. "Real tragedy. He was a good man. Was he alone?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, far as we can tell. His eyes held a warning. "You should know. Accidents happen a lot around that property. Unstable ground. Dangerous for folks who don't know what they're doing. Is that a threat, Sheriff?" "That's friendly advice from a man who's seen too many funerals." He glanced at June, then back to me. "You've got a daughter to think about, Mrs. Wren. Sometimes the smart thing is knowing when to stop asking questions." He walked away, leaving me shaking in the churchyard. June's fingers dug into my arm. "Mama, I heard Mrs. Pike talking to Mrs. Dobbins. They said you've gone against the church. They said," her voice broke, "they said people who oppose God's work don't prosper in Fair Hollow." I looked at the church, at its white walls and golden cross catching sunlight. Built on blood money, sanctified by lies. That evening smoke rose from the edge of town. By the time I reached Agnes Holloway's house, it was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward a sky turning purple with dusk. The sheriff stood watching, his face impassive. "Terrible accident," he said as I approached. "Knocked over a lantern, they think. At her age these things happen, but I saw the door barred from the outside. Saw the windows, shuttered and nailed shut. Agnes Holloway had been burned alive. Just like she'd tried to burn the church 23 years ago. Justice, they'd probably call it. God's will." I turned away before anyone could see me crying. In the ashes, I found it, a partially burned envelope with my name scrawled across the front. The letter inside was smoke-stained, but readable. Agnes's spidery handwriting racing across the page as if she'd known time was running out. "The vault's blood cost is older than you know. Father Samuel Bellamy wasn't the first. His predecessor, Father Marcus, built the tunnels in 1867 with miners' labor, then ensured their silence permanently. 23 men buried beneath consecrated ground, their families told they'd moved west. My own grandfather was among them. Lucian knows everything. He inherited not just the church, but his family's sins. The gold is still there. Millions. But it's cursed by the hands that stole it and the lives that protected it. There's another entrance, beneath my house, the tunnel Samuel used to move the bodies. If you're reading this, I'm dead. Use it. Expose everything. Let the dead finally speak." I showed the letter to June, watched her face harden with a determination that frightened me. "We have to finish this," she said simply. That night, we returned to Agnes's house. The fire department had left it to smolder, the structure too damaged to save. But the floor in the back room, beneath a fallen bookshelf, revealed what Agnes had described. A trapdoor, newer than the house itself. The tunnel below was different from the one beneath the church. Narrower, older. The walls wept moisture, and the air tasted of copper and decay. We followed it for what felt like hours, June's hand in mine, neither of us speaking. The tunnel sloped downward, then leveled, then opened into a space so vast our small lamp couldn't find its edges. The vault gold bars rose in stacks along the walls, each stamped with insignias I didn't recognize. Foreign governments, mining companies long defunct, federal seals from the 1860s. Between the stacks stood wooden coffins, their lids marked with crosses and Latin prayers, smuggling containers dressed as holy cargo. In the center of the chamber, on a stone bier, lay the mummified remains of a priest in full vestments. A leather journal rested on his chest, preserved by the dry air. I opened it with shaking hands. The first entry was dated June 3rd, 1911. I can no longer call this God's work. What began as funding for his church has become a monument to greed. I have killed to protect this secret. 12 men over 4 decades. Their blood stains every coin, every bar, every breath I take in this cursed place. I flipped to the final entry, dated September 17th, 1911, 2 days before the fire. Agnes knows. That foolish girl found the ledgers. She threatens to expose everything to Rome. I've tried to reason with her, but she speaks of justice, of truth, as if those words have power here. Tomorrow I will seal the vault permanently, collapse the tunnels, let Lucian rebuild above ground, clean and holy. Perhaps God will forgive what I cannot. The names of my victims follow, that God may judge us both. The list included my husband's father, Eli's grandfather, men whose families still lived in Fair Hollow, built on the wealth of their silence. Mama. June's whisper was sharp with fear. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel we'd entered through, voices getting closer. Father Bellamy emerged first, followed by Sheriff Elkins and Mayor Pike. The priest held a lantern high, his face no longer gentle. "Mrs. Wren, I'd hoped you'd take my offer." He looked genuinely disappointed. "Now we have a more permanent solution to consider." "The journal," I said, holding it up. "Samuel confesses everything, names, dates, methods. If anything happens to us, it goes to the federal marshal." "Does it?" Bellamy smiled sadly. "And who will believe a widow and her daughter over the word of Fair Hollow's most respected citizens, over church records and official documents, over men of God?" Pike stepped forward. "It's simple, Nora. You and June return to your lives. Forget what you've seen, or—" He glanced at the vault's shadows. "You join the others who couldn't keep silent." Behind us, from the church tunnel, came the sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Sheriff Elkins moved toward us, his hand on his revolver. But his eyes, God help me, his eyes looked sorry. The choice was simple, life or truth. But then June squeezed my hand, and I thought of Agnes burning, of Eli dying in darkness, of my husband crushed under rock to keep this secret. Some prices are too high to pay, even survival. "No," I said, my voice steady. "We're going to tell everyone, and you're going to let us walk out of here." Father Bellamy's face hardened. "I don't think so." The sheriff's gun cleared leather, and then the second tunnel erupted with movement. The figure that emerged from the second tunnel wasn't Salvation. It was Caleb Boone, the town deputy, his rifle already raised. Behind him, 3 more men, Pike's hired hands, the kind who asked no questions and remembered nothing. We were surrounded, trapped between stone and greed and men who'd proven they'd kill to protect both. "Take them," Father Bellamy said quietly. His pastoral warmth completely vanished. "The crypt beneath the new church. We'll deal with this properly after dark." Sheriff Elkins holstered his gun, but couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Nora, I truly am, but some things are bigger than one woman and her daughter. Things like gold," I spat. "Things like murder dressed up as God's will. Things like keeping this town alive." His voice was tired, ancient. "Fair Hollow runs on church money, always has. Every family here owes their livelihood to what's buried in this vault. You think they'll thank you for destroying that? You think truth feeds hungry children?" June pressed against my side, trembling but silent. I pulled her closer, the journal still clutched in my other hand. "At least let June go. She's just a child who knows too much." Mayor Pike stepped forward, his charming mask fully dropped. "But reasonable people can reach reasonable arrangements. You give us the journal, sign a document swearing to silence, and we'll provide a monthly stipend, enough to live comfortably. Your daughter grows up safe, educated, provided for." "Bought," I corrected. "You mean bought. Call it what you like. The offer stands for the next 60 seconds. I looked at June's frightened face, at the sheriff's guilty eyes, at the gold stacked like tombstones around us. I thought about what Agnes had done, burning children alive while trying to expose evil. I thought about Eli, dead in darkness, about my husband, crushed because he asked questions. What was truth worth? What price do you put on righteousness when your daughter's life hangs in the balance? "I need time to think," I said. Pike smiled. "You have until morning. Sheriff, take them to the crypt." They marched us through tunnels I'd never seen, past chambers filled with more gold, more coffins, more evidence of decades of theft and murder. The new church's foundation rose above us, and I realized with sick certainty that they'd built their temple directly over Samuel Bellamy's cursed vault. Sanctified ground laid over unholy wealth. The crypt was everything the word promised: cold stone, darkness pressing like a living thing, and the smell of old death. They locked us in a cell that had once held wine, but now held only despair. Sheriff Elkins paused at the door, his lantern throwing shadows across his weathered face. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I didn't want any of this, but wanting doesn't change what is." "You could choose differently," I told him. "You could be the one man in Fair Hollow who stands for something besides gold and fear." Something moved behind his eyes. Pain, maybe, or the ghost of conscience. "I've got a wife, 3 grandchildren. They depend on me." "So they can inherit your shame, your cowardice?" He flinched. "I'll make sure you and the girl aren't hurt." "That's the best I can offer." "The best you can offer," I said, "is to unlock this door and let us go." For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might. His hand moved toward the key, his face torn between what he knew was right and what he'd been doing wrong for so long. It felt like duty. Then the moment passed. He locked the door and walked away, taking the light with him. June and I sat in darkness that was absolute. I pulled her onto my lap like I used to when she was small, before the world taught her that mothers couldn't protect their children from everything. "Mama," she whispered, "are we going to die?" "No," I lied, "because that's what mothers do. We're going to survive this, somehow." We sat like that for hours, long enough for my eyes to adjust to darkness that remained impenetrable, long enough for hope to thin and fray, long enough for me to accept that I'd gambled my daughter's life on principles and lost. Then I heard it, a scraping sound, metal on stone. The door. "Mama," June's voice, but not from my lap. From beyond the cell. I stood so fast I nearly fell. "June, how—" "The tunnel." "The one from the vault connects to the crypt foundation." I squeezed through. Her voice was shaking but determined. "Come on. We have to go now." She'd found a crack in the cell wall where ancient stone had shifted over the years. Barely wide enough for a child, impossibly narrow for an adult. But fear and desperation make us flexible in ways we never imagined. I scraped through, leaving skin on stone, my dress tearing. The journal stayed clutched against my chest. When I emerged on the other side, June was waiting with a candle stub she'd found God knows where, its tiny flame dancing in the draught. "This way," she said, and led me through passages that shouldn't exist, through cracks in the foundation that spoke of time and settling earth, and secrets that insisted on surfacing no matter how deep they were buried. We emerged not in the church, but behind it, in the small cemetery where recent graves marked Fair Hollow's current dead. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky the color of old bruises. My hands were bleeding, my dress in tatters, but I was free. June looked at me, her young face hardened by what she'd witnessed. "What do we do now?" I thought about Pike's offer, about safety purchased through silence, about the life June could have if I just surrendered the journal and bent my knee to men who mistook power for righteousness. Then I thought about Eli dying alone, about Agnes burning, about 23 miners whose families never knew what happened to them, about my husband, crushed under rock to keep this secret sealed. Some silences are survival, others are complicity. "We go to the town hall," I said, "and we tell everyone." The town hall meeting had been scheduled for weeks, an ordinary session to discuss ordinary business, taxes, road repairs, the 1,000 small bureaucracies that keep a town running. Mayor Pike stood at the podium, Father Bellamy seated in the front row, Sheriff Elkins by the door. The room held perhaps 40 people, farmers and shopkeepers and housewives who'd come hoping for nothing more dramatic than an argument over property lines. June and I entered through the back door, and the room went quiet. I knew how we looked, filthy, bleeding, dressed in rags, like refugees from catastrophe. which in a way we were. Nora? Mrs. Dobbins half rose from her seat. Dear Lord, what happened? The truth happened, I said, walking down the center aisle. And it's time you all heard it. Mayor Pike's face went red. This is a closed session. Mrs. Wren, you need to leave. I'm not leaving until I'm heard. I reached the front of the room and turned to face the assembly. Behind me, Pike made a motion to the sheriff, but Elkins didn't move. Just stood there, his face unreadable. I held up the journal. This belonged to Father Samuel Bellamy. In it, he confesses to 40 years of theft, smuggling, and murder. He names names, dates, methods. Every dollar that built this town came from gold stolen from federal shipments and hidden beneath St. Bridget's Church. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Father Lucien Bellamy stood slowly, his face a mask of wounded dignity. These are the ravings of a desperate woman, he said, his voice carrying that familiar pastoral authority. Mrs. Wren has been under tremendous strain. Her husband's death, her poverty, it's driven her to delusions. Have you? I opened the journal and began to read. June 3rd, 1911. I can no longer call this God's work. I have killed 12 men over 4 decades. Their blood stains every coin, every bar, every breath I take in this cursed place. The room went deathly quiet. Their names follow, I continued, flipping pages. Thomas Merrin, Eli's grandfather. Jacob Wren, my husband's father. Marcus Holloway, Agnes's grandfather. 23 men total, murdered or buried alive to keep the secret of the vault. I looked at Father Lucien. Your uncle confesses everything. And you knew. You've known since 1911, and you've kept it hidden, kept benefiting from blood money, while preaching about sin and salvation. She's lying. Pike was on his feet now. That journal could be forged. This woman is unstable, dangerous. Then explain the vault, I said. The one beneath the old church. The one filled with federal gold and coffins used to smuggle it. The one that cost Eli Merrin his life 2 nights ago when he got too close to the truth. Faces in the crowd were changing, shock giving way to horror, horror to something harder. I saw it in their eyes, the calculations running. How much of their prosperity had come from that cursed ground? How complicit were they in silence that had lasted generations? Last night, I continued, Sheriff Elkins locked me and my daughter in the church crypt to keep us quiet. Mayor Pike offered me money to destroy this journal and disappear. And Father Bellamy, I looked at the priest, saw his mask finally beginning to crack. Father Bellamy told me outright that some graves must stay closed, that some truths are too heavy for mortal souls. That's not, I was trying to protect, Bellamy's voice faltered. Protect what? The church? Or your family's legacy of murder? He stood there, his face crumbling, all authority bleeding away. You don't understand. The church does good work. We feed the poor, educate children, provide comfort to the suffering. Where do you think that money comes from? Where do you think any church gets funding in a territory this poor? Not from stolen gold, I said. Not from the bones of murdered men. The world isn't clean, he shouted, his composure finally shattering. It's not black and white, good and evil. It's compromise and necessity and choosing the lesser evil. Yes, my uncle killed to protect the operation. Yes, I've maintained it. But the alternative was watching this entire town starve, watching families torn apart by poverty while sitting on wealth that was already stolen, already gone from whoever claimed it first. I made a choice to use that money for God's work, to at least redeem it through service. You can't redeem blood with charity, I said quietly. You can't sanctify murder with hymns. The room erupted then. Voices raised in anger, in denial, in dawning horror. Mrs. Pike was crying. The Dobbins family sat frozen. Young Daniel Fletcher, whose father's name appeared in the journal, stood with his fists clenched. Sheriff Elkins finally moved, walking slowly to the front of the room. He looked at me, at June, at the journal in my hands. Then he removed his badge and set it on the podium. She's telling the truth, he said heavily. All of it. I've known for 20 years. I've helped hide bodies, threaten witnesses, maintain the lie. And I'm done. Roy, you can't. Pike started. I can and I am. It's over, Thaddeus. It's all over. The crowd surged forward then, not toward me but toward Pike and Bellamy. Demands for answers, for justice, For accountability decades overdue, someone ran for the federal marshal's office in the next county. Someone else headed for the newspaper. In the chaos, June gripped my hand. "Mama, the church." I looked out the window and saw smoke rising from the direction of St. Bridget's, the new church, built over the old vault. Someone had set it burning. We ran, half the town following. By the time we reached the church, flames were already consuming the roof, spreading down through the walls toward the foundation. Toward the vault beneath. "No!" Father Bellamy pushed through the crowd, trying to run inside. Sheriff Elkins caught him, held him back. "The vault will collapse! Everything will be buried." "Good," someone shouted. "Let it burn." And burn it did. We stood watching as Fair Hollow's Temple of Lies collapsed inward, the heat so intense we had to back away. The ground shook as underground chambers gave way. The vault finally doing what Samuel Bellamy had tried to accomplish in 1911, sealing itself permanently. When the dust settled, where St. Bridget's Church had stood was only a smoking crater. The vault, the gold, the evidence, all of it buried under tons of collapsed stone and earth. Father Bellamy sank to his knees in the dirt, no longer a priest, but just a man watching his God burn. Mayor Pike stood beside him, his face grey as ash, but I had the journal. I had Agnes's letter. I had testimony from Sheriff Elkins, and the deed that had started it all. The truth might be buried, but it was no longer silent. I'm writing this from my porch 20 years later. My hands too gnarled to hold a pen steady for long. June is grown now, living 3 states away with a husband who knows nothing of Fair Hollow, and children who've never seen the crater where a church once stood. She writes every month. She's happy. That's all a mother can ask. The town survived, though not unchanged. Mayor Pike died in prison. Father Bellamy was defrocked, spent his remaining years in a monastery somewhere in New Mexico, trying to make peace with a god he'd betrayed. Sheriff Elkins testified at the federal trial, then disappeared. I heard he went west, looking for some kind of redemption he'd never find. The crater remains, fenced off now. Too dangerous for development, too expensive to fill. Children dare each other to peer through the fence at night, claiming they hear bells ringing from underground. Maybe they do. Maybe some sounds echo forever in spaces built on suffering. Fair Hollow rebuilt itself slowly, honestly for the first time in its history. Without church money, without stolen gold, without the prosperity that blood had bought. It's smaller now, poorer, but cleaner somehow. People look each other in the eye again. I kept the journal, kept Agnes's letter, kept the deed that cost 15 cents and changed everything. They sit in a box under my bed, evidence of what happens when faith becomes weapon, when silence becomes complicity. Some nights I dream of the vault, of gold stacked like tombstones, of skeletal hands clutching rosaries, of Father Samuel Bellamy's mummified face, frozen in an expression I can't quite name. Regret or relief that someone finally told the truth. I think about Agnes often burning in her house of relics. About Eli, dying in darkness so I could escape. About my husband, crushed under rock because he asked questions that men of God didn't want answered. They paid the price of truth before I ever bid 15 cents on haunted ground. Was it worth it? That's what people ask when they hear the story. Was exposing the truth worth the lives it cost? The town it nearly destroyed? The innocence my daughter lost watching her mother defy men with guns and power? I don't know. I'm just an old woman now, writing a confession of my own. But I know this, silence has a price too. Accepting lies costs something that can't be measured in gold or bodies or ruined buildings. It costs your soul. Fair Hollow's prosperity was built on a foundation of stolen wealth and murdered witnesses. Every comfortable life, every full belly, every child sent to school, all of it purchased with blood and sanctified by men who mistook power for righteousness. And everyone knew. Maybe not the details, but they knew something was wrong, something was buried, something wasn't right about how blessed they were in a territory that should have broken them. But knowing is uncomfortable. Truth is expensive. So they chose not to look too closely at the ground beneath their feet until a desperate widow bought that ground for 15 cents. I never spent the rest of that 37 cents, by the way. It sits in a jar in my kitchen, 22 cents, that somehow feel heavier than all the gold in that vault. A reminder that small actions have consequences. That curiosity can be deadly, that sometimes the only thing standing between justice and evil is one scared woman with nothing left to lose. Yesterday, I walked to the crater for the first time in years. My bones ache now, my vision's dim, but I wanted to see it once more. Wanted to stand on the ground I bought and remember what it cost to own it truly. Wildflowers have started growing around the fence. Butterflies dance above the crater like souls finally released. And there, growing from the crater's edge, a single oak tree has taken root. Its branches reach toward sky, its roots digging deep into earth that holds secrets still. I stood beneath that tree, feeling sun on my face, and I thought about June, about her children, growing up free from the sins of Fair Hollow's past, about how truth, like saplings, takes time to grow strong, but eventually casts shade across even the darkest ground. Before I left, I buried this confession beneath that oak, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed against time, containing everything I've written here. The full story of what happened in Fair Hollow in 1934, when a widow and her daughter challenged a church built on blood. Future generations might find it, or the earth might keep it, adding one more secret to all the others buried here. Either way, it's told now, written down, real. Someone once said that truth is like water. It finds every crack, seeps through every seal, refuses to stay buried no matter how deep you dig the hole. They were right. I paid 15 cents for a piece of forgotten ground and found a $6 million secret, no priest blessed. But that's not the story, not really. The story is simpler, older, truer than gold or murder or corrupted faith. The story is this: some things stay buried only as long as no one is brave enough to dig. I dug, and Fair Hollow, broken, poor, honest at last, was what I found beneath. Faith built the church. But truth built what came after, that tree growing from the crater. Its roots are deep now, deep enough to touch the vault's ruins. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear something like bells ringing from underground. Not a warning this time, a release. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.